Welcome, everybody, to tonight's book talk, part of an ongoing virtual series from the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library that connects writers, historians, and TR scholars with all of you joining us from near and far, whether you're a lifelong TED head or someone swinging by to learn something new. I'm Marcy Whale, Manager of Public Programs and Education at the TRPL, and tonight I am delighted to be joined by Candice Millard, who is one of those nonfiction writers with an undeniable gift for transfiguring history into compelling narratives which rival the very best of fiction. And as I introduce our guest here, I would like to ask you, Candice, is there a question you would like to ask our studio audience for a bit of an icebreaker?
Yes, I would love to know who everyone's favorite president is.
That's a good question, and there is a right answer here, so
Yes,
everybody
we know
that.
you're allowed to stay if you have a slightly different answer. We won't kick you out.
But we'll think about it.
Yeah.
So feel free to drop that in the chat, and we'll review those as they come in. And now I'd like to introduce Candice. Candice Millard is the author of 4 New York Times best-selling books. Her first book and subject of this discussion, The River of Doubt, Theodore Roosevelt's Darkest Journey, was a Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers selection, a Book Sense pick, and a finalist for the Quill Awards. It has since been published in numerous editions, and I might add, was the very first text selected for the TRPL's Employee Book Club. That's not
wow. I'm honored.
Destiny of the Republic, A Tale of Madness, Medicine, and the Murder of a President won the Edgar Award for Best Fact Crime and the Penn Center USA Award for Research Nonfiction. It was adapted into a PBS documentary, Murder of a President, and an award-winning Netflix series, Death by Lightning. Hero of the Empire, The Boer War, A Daring Escape, and the Making of Winston Churchill was an Indie Next pick, a top 10 critic pick by the New York Times, and named Amazon's #1 history book of 2016. Millard's most recent book is River of the Gods, Genius, Courage, and Betrayal in the Search for the Source of the Nile. She is the recipient of the 2017 Bio Award for her contributions to the craft of biography, and her work has appeared in the New York Times Book Review, Washington Post, Book World, The Guardian, The Atlantic, and National Geographic. So all of that is to say, if Candice writes something, it's definitely worth reading. Candice, we are so thrilled to have you here with us tonight. Now, without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Marcy. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you to everyone who made time to join us tonight. It is such an honor to be involved in any way with the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library, which we are all so excited about. It's going to be one of the world's great museums, and I cannot wait to visit it. It was also an honor and a great challenge to write about Theodore Roosevelt, especially since it was my first book. It was exciting, it was endlessly fascinating, but it was also daunting. You know, I worked at National Geographic for 6 years before writing The River of Doubt. So I knew at least one thing going into this. I knew that the Amazon was such a big subject that thousands of books could be written about it without exhausting it. What we do know about the Amazon is extraordinary, but there is still so much that we don't know. The same probably could not be said about the other main subject of this book, Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt is obviously an incredibly popular and familiar figure, and many fine biographies have been written about him. But the closer I looked, the more convinced I became that an important dimension of his life had not been adequately explored. Yes, he was a great leader, a politician, a president, but above all else, he was a naturalist. And what intrigued me was his greatest achievement in this area, his trip down an unmapped river in the Amazon, the River of Doubt. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. Sorry, I missed that. There it is, the River of Doubt. The expedition took place after Roosevelt tried and failed to regain the presidency. And it's been largely overlooked precisely because it came after his active political career. And to the extent that it is discussed, it's put in the same category as his hunting trips. But let me tell you, this was no hunting trip. Even by the extraordinary standards of Roosevelt's life, this was a wholly different kind of challenge. This was a serious scientific expedition that became an extraordinary story of survival. It was a contest of man against nature, man against man, and man against himself. During this trip, Roosevelt and his men lost nearly all of their supplies to rapids. One man drowned, another man was murdered, the rest, including Roosevelt's own son, nearly starved, and the survivors emerged from the jungle in rags. They were shadowed and attacked by indigenous men, and Roosevelt became gravely ill and nearly committed suicide in an attempt to save the other men. Roosevelt famously complained that he never had the chance to really prove himself. He said, if you don't have the great event, you don't have a great leader. On the River of Doubt, he found that event. This was a desperate, all or nothing struggle that revealed character in its truest form. It is a story of an exceptional man, a leader not on the scale of nations and armies, but a tiny group of besieged men driven to the limits of human endurance. This trip is almost unimaginable by today's standards. Try to imagine George Bush or Barack Obama announcing that they're going to, on their own, explore Mars. It's just that extreme. Even today, this river is in one of the most remote areas of the world. And in 1914, it was a blank spot on the map of South America. It was a geographical mystery, a challenge that explorers today can only dream about. In fact, the river got its name because even the man who discovered its headwaters had no idea where it led. Next slide, please. It was also incredibly dangerous. As you can see in this picture, the Amazon River runs west to east. The River of Doubt runs south to north. It begins in the Brazilian highlands and runs north into the Amazon basin. It is a principal tributary of the Madeira, which is a principal tributary of the Amazon. But unlike the Amazon, which is wide and sluggish, the River of Doubt is fast and twisting and choked with rapids. Even for professional explorers, the River of Doubt would be an extreme challenge, something that would be set aside for someone of the caliber of Robert Peary, Ernest Shackleton, or Sir Edmund Hillary, not an amateur, and certainly not a 55-year-old former president of the United States. Given all the risks, your first question is probably, why would Roosevelt go on such a dangerous expedition? And the answer is that as much as anything else, this expedition epitomized his interests and his personality. As I've said, Roosevelt was an extraordinary naturalist. From his earliest childhood, he was fascinated with insects, birds, anything he could catch. He was the kind of boy who kept spiders in his dresser and mice under his bed. But he studied them in an organized, deliberate way. One of Roosevelt's most revealing stories about his childhood interest in nature was the day when he was just 7 years old and he was walking up Broadway and he saw a dead seal outside of a shop. He asked questions about it. He measured it with a little pocket ruler. He took notes on it, and he went back to see it every day until it was no longer there. Roosevelt later wrote, "That seal filled me with every possible feeling of romance and adventure." And as he grew, so did his love for and knowledge of nature. He knew mammals well, but he knew birds even better. When he was in the White House, he invited the famous naturalist John Burroughs to Pine Knot, his presidential retreat in Virginia. Together, the two men identified more than 75 species of birds. Burroughs knew all of them but two, and Roosevelt knew all of them but two. But Roosevelt actually had identified one more. A few days earlier, he had found a Lincoln sparrow in a field. So one morning before church, he took Burroughs to that field. They couldn't find the bird, but if they had, Theodore Roosevelt, President of the United States, would have identified more birds than John Burroughs, one of the most famous ornithologists in our nation's history. Burroughs himself was astonished. The second reason Roosevelt went on this expedition was in reaction to losing the election of 1912. If you look at the entirety of Roosevelt's life, you'll see a pattern. Again and again, every time he faced heartbreak or disappointment, he turned to hard adventure. He wanted tough physical challenges that tested his strength and his courage and helped him forget. And the more dangerous they were, the better. This pattern started early in Roosevelt's life when he was just a sophomore in college and his father died. He went to the backwoods of Maine to fight off his grief, but he pushed himself so hard that his guide warned that he would kill himself before he would even say he was tired. Just a few years later, Roosevelt's mother and his first wife died on the same night in the same house. And after that, he went west to the Dakota Badlands. And he spent the next 2 years corralling cattle, fighting drunk cowboys, tracking down thieves, and never, ever giving himself a break. He hardened himself physically and mentally, and he relied on that for the rest of his life. Finally, Roosevelt was drawn to the River of Doubt because he had always yearned for great achievement. Of course, he had served 2 terms as president, he had won the Nobel Peace Prize, but he wanted something more. He wanted to be a real explorer, to contribute something of significance to science. And he was never concerned about danger. He was always willing to die for a great cause. He found that kind of cause in the Spanish-American War and his famous charge up Kettle Hill, but he still sought danger. By the time he reached Brazil, he said that he had enjoyed as much life as any other 9 men, and if it was necessary, he was prepared to leave his bones in South America. Roosevelt never let his stature or his fame get in the way of doing something dangerous, but he did let it help him. As a former president, he was able to take on this expedition a handful of the world's most capable explorers. It was a small group. It basically boils down to 4 central figures. Roosevelt, of course, his second son, Kermit, the American naturalist, George Cherry, and the Brazilian explorer, Colonel Candido Rondon. Next slide, please. First, I will talk about Kermit. Kermit was an extraordinarily talented young man. He was only 24, already spoke at least half a dozen languages. He had finished Harvard in just 2.5 years, and he had been living in Brazil for the past year and would prove to be exceptionally important to this expedition, even though he had not really intended to go on the expedition. Kermit had just become engaged to a beautiful young socialite named Belle Willard, and he wanted to be with her. He didn't want to be on an unknown river in the Amazon, but he was devoted to his father, and he felt that his father needed him. Kermit is the real hero of this expedition. He rose to the occasion despite debilitating illness and fever. He lived up to the family name. Unfortunately, in the end, his is also the most tragic story of this book. Next slide, please. Then there's George Cherry, the tough and intrepid naturalist that the American Museum of Natural History sent to watch over Roosevelt. This is the guy you would have wanted with you in the Amazon. He had spent decades in the rainforests of South America, collecting thousands of birds and other animals. He had also led several local insurrections. He spent 2.5 years running guns and 3 months in prison, every day expecting to be hauled outside and shot. He was about the toughest ornithologist you could ever hope to meet. Next slide, please. Finally, Colonel Candido Rondon. Rondon was one of Brazil's greatest heroes. He was part indigenous. He was born during the War of the Triple Alliance and orphaned when he was just 2 years old. Somehow he worked his way up the ranks of the Brazilian military to become its most legendary commander, in charge of the Strategic Telegraph Commission, which strung the first telegraph line across the Amazon. By the time Roosevelt met Rondon, Rondon had spent the better part of his life exploring the Brazilian interior and making contact with its most dangerous and isolated tribes. In fact, he was the man who first discovered the river that Roosevelt was to descend and named it the Rio da Dúvida, the River of Doubt. Next slide, please. Rondon was painfully thin and just 5'3" tall, but he had a powerful, intimidating presence. His men, many of whom had come directly from prison, were terrified of him. He was kind and compassionate, but absolutely unbending. He was passionately devoted to exploring the Amazon, but even more than that, to protecting its indigenous people and, if possible, assimilating them. In fact, he was so devoted to indigenous rights that he would not let his men fight back, even when they were directly attacked. He said, "Die if you must, but kill never." And his men did die. They were constantly attacked, but he would never let them retaliate. In the context of the Brazilian frontier, this was just absolutely unheard of. But Rondon never asked anything of his men that he didn't demand of himself. He refused all privileges. He walked instead of riding. He faced death routinely and bravely. A few years earlier, he had made first contact with the Nambaquaras, who were known for being incredibly warlike. Hoping to make it clear that he came in friendship, Rondon had taken just 3 men with him, riding in single file, their mules heaped high with gifts. Before they even reached the camp, however, Rondon felt something fly past his face, and in the millisecond that it took him to realize that it was an arrow, another one hit his helmet, and a third struck him square in the chest, sticking in his leather bandolier that he was wearing. After ordering his men not to shoot, he slowly and calmly turned his mule around and rode back to his own camp with a 5-foot-long arrow sticking out of his chest. It seems incredible to me now that Rondon is not well known to most Americans, but those who do know him rank him among the greatest explorers who have ever lived. Roosevelt put him among his top 4, including Roald Amundsen, Richard Perry, and Richard Byrd. Albert Einstein nominated Rondon for the Nobel Peace Prize in the 1920s, and an entire region of the Amazon, an area nearly twice the size of England, was named Rondonia in his honor. Next slide, please. These men were about as experienced a group as you could hope to find on an expedition like this. And it is a measure of what they were up against that they were so quickly driven to the edge of disaster. This expedition was played out on the greatest natural battlefield on Earth. It's a place where animals have evolved an amazing array of specialized features and skills. There are plants that can change from a bush to a vine to a tree, depending on the sunlight. There are moths with 6-inch long tongues. There are fish that can leap 6 feet out of the river and snatch insects and lizards and even small birds. Next slide, please. In fact, the only creatures not getting anything to eat were Roosevelt and his men. They had come expecting to live off the land, but not only could they not kill game, they couldn't even find it. Compared to the creatures of the jungle, they were clumsy and conspicuous. They had also come believing they could defend themselves against any indigenous people they might meet. But here again, they found themselves completely outmatched. Next slide, please. The jungle near the River of Doubt is inhabited by the Cinta Larga. Cinta Larga means wide belt in Portuguese, and they're named for the broad strips of bark you can see there that they wrap around their waists to protect themselves during war. It's essentially their only item of clothing. The Cinta Larga knew almost nothing of the outside world. In fact, they would have no official contact with the rest of the world until the late 1960s. Roosevelt and his men were the first white men they had ever seen, and they weren't even sure they were human. In the eyes of the Cinta Larga, they were pale, hairy, wearing clothes, and they were riding in boats. And although the Cinta Larga lived on the banks of a river, they had not yet developed boats. But they were incredibly sophisticated when it came to surviving in the jungle. They could move quickly and quietly, following extremely subtly marked trails. They found game the expedition not only couldn't find, but couldn't see or hear. They killed it with simple but very effective weapons, using arrows with natural poisons. And they routinely engaged in war, and they were very good at it. They even practiced cannibalism until the early 1970s. They would not eat their own, but anything or anyone who was not Cinta Larga was considered to be edible. And Roosevelt and his men, who didn't even look human to them, certainly fell into that category. Next slide, please. The story of what happened on this expedition is obviously what this book is about. So for those of you who haven't read it, I won't spoil it. I'll just say that this is a story of adventure and survival. But even more than that, it's a story about leadership and strength of character that is exceedingly rare. It also underscores the questions we face regarding the future of the Amazon and regions like it. It doesn't take much exposure to the Amazon to come away with an almost overwhelming feeling of awe and respect for nature. This river and the rainforest that surrounds it are a sort of time machine, which takes you back not just 112 years ago when Roosevelt was there, but through millions of years of evolutionary history. Next slide, please. Today, most of the river is in protected Indian territory. The only way to reach it is to rent a small plane, fly for hours over absolutely unbroken rainforest from horizon to horizon. Next slide, please. This picture was taken from the plane I rented as we approached the river. We're in the middle of a rainstorm, which is just part of flying in the Amazon during the rainy season. On a personal note, one of the scariest moments I've had in my life took place when I was on this plane. We had just been flying for a couple of minutes when the single engine stopped and we dropped like a stone. And, I had heard in theory that it was possible to restart an engine in flight, but I had never seen it done. And the pilot's hands were shaking so badly, he couldn't control them very well. But by some miracle, he was able to restart the engine when we were about 1,500 feet from the ground. And we pulled back up and we were fine. But the pilot was so terrified, he was basically useless to me after that. And I will say also that just sadly, a couple of months after this, two freelance photographers for National Geographic died in a plane crash in the Rio Negro. So this is something that does still take place in this very, very remote, wild area. But this river and the rainforest that surrounds it is absolutely worth the effort and the risk to see it. The images are simply unforgettable. Next slide, please. It is gorgeous and pristine, a lush green tangle of leaves and vines. And I have incredibly stirring and vivid memories of it, of the extraordinary plants and flowers, the smells, the deep silence, the millions of insects. I was there in the rainy season as Roosevelt was, and the river floods into the jungle and reflects the sky, and it's hard to tell where the water stops and the trees begin. Next slide, please. The tragedy is that the very sacrifices that Roosevelt, Rondon, and their men made to understand this region have set the stage for its destruction. As so often happens, exploration encourages development. The first man in is never the last. The telegraph line that Rondon worked so hard to build and sacrificed so much for became a highway in the late 1960s. It is infamous among anthropologists, naturalists, and conservationists because it has led to widespread deforestation and has made it much easier for adventurers to enter indigenous territory. In 1500, there were between 2 and 4 million indigenous people in Brazil, and today there are about 350,000. This turn of events would have broken the hearts of Roosevelt and Rondon. And were Roosevelt alive today, I know that he would be devoting the same energy to protecting the Amazon that he did to exploring it. And if the story of this expedition is any guide, his kind of leadership might be just what is needed to save the River of Doubt, and let us admire and learn from it for another million years. Thank you very much.
That was wonderful, Candice.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that and weaving in your personal experience, but also that poignant note at the end there that exploration leads to development.
Yeah,
so it's kind of this almost like Greek tragedy of sorts. Oh,
yeah, very true.
And also, I have to give major credit to the evocative image of George Bush or Obama exploring Mars. That will really stick with me.
Yeah. Well, it puts it in perspective. I mean, it was really just an audacious adventure, and insanely dangerous.
Absolutely. Gosh. And just reading your book, and I will move to questions from our studio audience here, you do such a wonderful job of capturing that fear and that, like, there was 10 chances to 1 that they were going to come out of this alive, and you feel it. And reading it at, like, nighttime, it just sunk into you with dread in the most wonderful way. And that's really a compliment to you as a writer, that you can convey that kind of emotion to your readers. Are you up for answering a few questions?
Absolutely. Yeah, of course.
Okay, so studio audience, if you haven't yet had a chance to drop a question in the chat, feel free to do so now. We will not be holding it against you if you did not answer that Lincoln or Nixon were your favorite president, you know. And I've got a few questions teed up from Instagram as well as myself. So do you want an easy one or a hard one first?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Throw it at me. Whatever you think.
Okay. We'll start easy because my hard questions are about 2 paragraphs each. Okay. So this one was from Instagram. After reading the book, it's hard not to believe the president understood the risk. Why would he still make the trip? Or did he not fully comprehend the risks he and the team would face?
He did. He 100% did understand it. But you have to remember, as you know, if you read the book, it changed kind of mid-action, right? So it was going to be this very kind of easy, interesting, but easy collecting trip, right? He was going to give a speech or several speeches in South America, and then he was going to go on a collecting trip, kind of similar to what he did in Africa. And then he gets there and the foreign minister says, yeah, you could do that. Or you could do something really interesting. You know, we just found the headwaters of this river. We have no idea where it goes. And it's Theodore Roosevelt. So of course he's going to say yes, even though, I mean, he hadn't been really paying attention to even the planning for the easy trip because he was distracted by, he had just lost this presidential election. It really knocked him for a loop. You know, he had never lost before. He wasn't used to losing and he was depressed and he just wasn't really paying attention. And then this is a completely different, 100 times more difficult trip and they're really not ready for it. And he gave everybody a chance. He's like, look, you don't have to go. I will completely understand. Everybody wanted to stay. His son certainly wanted to stay with him to help protect. So he 100% knew what he was. And when the American Museum of Natural History, which was sponsoring this trip, when they found out, they said, no way. There is no way you're doing this. Absolutely not. And he said, I'm sorry, it's my life, and I want to do something, again, significant. And it wasn't just a vanity trip. He was a scientist. He cared about exploration. And this was a chance, this incredibly rare chance to explore an area that had not been mapped at all. It was on no map of the world. And he just wasn't going to lose this chance.
And that's such a wonderful tie-in to TR that I think a lot of people don't fully realize is you highlighted it in your talk. Like, he was president for 2 terms, he won the Nobel Prize, but what he wanted to do was have this contribution to naturalism. That's what he really wanted to be able to, like, willing to die for.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. He said that, he was always willing to pay the piper for a good dance. And and as we know, he was 60 years old. He only lived a few more years after this, and he was always very, very ill. So in a way, it did, probably contribute to an earlier death. Yeah.
We've got some in the chat here. Okay, what was your favorite memory of your research? Was it the moment when the engine went out and had to be restarted in the air?
I mean, that was the most dramatic memory. I was telling Marcy before we started that I actually, my oldest daughter was then 8 months old, and she was here in Kansas City where I live. She was with my parents, and my husband, who had been a foreign correspondent for many years, he was with me on this plane. And so I just thought, we're absolute idiots. We've just orphaned our child. So it was quite a relief when we actually were able to pull back up and we survived. But the problem was, as I said, this pilot, he was young and inexperienced, and he was terrified, and he just wanted to land. And, this was my first book. This was my big opportunity, my chance, right? And I had spent a year planning this trip. I had saved every penny to be able to pay for this trip. And I had, Rondon, because this was so serious for him as well, and mapping it. And he insisted on carefully charting this river. I had all of the coordinates, and I could look them all up, and I knew where everything had happened. So this was just this unbelievable opportunity for me to experience what he experienced in some way, and with a lot of safeguards myself, but still, it's always a dangerous place. So yeah, that was absolutely the most memorable. But probably my favorite part. So this river is still in protected indigenous territory. And so I had talked with the New York Times correspondent there in Rio before I went. And he said, because in theory you can ask for permission to land there along the river, but they'll never get back to you. And he said, it just won't. But I was able to find a little fishing village that was just in general Brazilian territory. And it's actually a fishing camp that this guy had started. And I said it was like being on Gilligan's Island, because he had literally brought like a hammer and some nails, and everything else he used the rainforest for, to build these beautiful little huts. There are a couple little huts, and then the place where you could get some food. And I remember having the most delicious piranha soup while we were there. And he showed me, I have pictures of this piranha, because we were out on the river one day, and the piranha was like enormous. You can't see my other hand, but you think of little piranhas. No, it was huge. It was this huge piranha. And but it has so many bones in it. You can't have like a piranha fillet, but you can have soup. They make soup out of it, and it kind of tastes like miso soup. It's very good. So that was kind of the best experience. And I also, not to go on and on, but I met this incredible guy named Sidney Pozuelo, who was at that time the modern day Rondon. And his job, though, is to go into the Amazon and to find these groups of people who have not had any contact with the outside world, and to not contact them, just to know where they are and to leave them alone. And they've realized that's the best way to protect them.
Is there going to be an end to the good facts in this talk? Piranha soup, and then a guy's job is to find the uncontacted tribes and then not contact them.
Don't contact them. Leave them alone.
Leave them alone. Okay, we have a question from someone who seems very smart and talented. Can you talk about the relationship between TR and Kermit and how that role played a role in TR surviving the River of Doubt?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that I always marvel about with Theodore Roosevelt is that he packed so much into a relatively short life. I'm 58, so his living to 60 seems very, very young to me. And it was. But he packed so much into it. But he also always found time for his children. You know, he was extremely involved with his children. He spent a lot of time with them, wrote them long, thoughtful letters. And he knew his son Kermit very, very well. And he loved Kermit and he was proud of him, but he always worried about Kermit because Kermit reminded him of his brother Elliot, who was Eleanor Roosevelt's father. And Elliot was an alcoholic and a morphine addict, and he died very young and died a tragic death. And Roosevelt and his sisters always worried about him and were trying to help him. And finally, Roosevelt had said at one point, you just have to harden your heart when it comes to Elliot. But Elliot was he was always like the handsome brother, the charming brother, kind of a poet at heart. And that was Kermit. Kermit was, he, again, this incredible linguist, so smart and so brave and very action forward like his father. But he was sensitive, a sensitive soul. And again, the kind of the heart of a poet. And Roosevelt worried about him. And so, when he went to Africa, he took Kermit with him because he knew that Kermit, like himself, was at his best when he had a great challenge. And so then when he goes to South America, Kermit's already been living there, as I said, building bridges, learning the language and acquiring all these incredible skills. And so when they get on the River of Doubt, and it's really, really difficult, and he made some serious mistakes. He was in part responsible for the drowning of Simplicio and a mistake that he made. But he worked as hard and harder than any man on that expedition. I mean, his shoes were literally rotting off his feet. He was in the river so much, helping to free these canoes and things. And so when they get to a point where Roosevelt at this point is incredibly sick, he can't even sit up. They reach this series of waterfalls, and then there's these hauled out tree trunks, and they're starving and they're scared. And Rondon says, "There's no way we can get through there. We're going to have to just, go through the forest, basically every man for himself." And Kermit knows that his father cannot do that. And he says, "I'm going to figure this out. I know that I can get these canoes down these falls." And the men trusted him because they had been watching him for months and they had seen who he was. And so, it's just this incredible moment between these two men where Theodore Roosevelt is so sick, he thinks he's going to endanger the lives of the other men. He decides that he's going to take his own life so he doesn't hold them back. He has a lethal dose of morphine that he brings with him just so, and all of these trips, just so, again, he doesn't endanger other men. And his son says, "Absolutely not. I'm taking you with me." And Theodore Roosevelt, who knows his son so well, realizes the best way to save his son's life is to let his son save him. And that's what happens. Yeah.
Just, it hits every time. Okay. Which aspect of your research proved most unexpected, and how did it shape your interpretation of the expedition?
Can you see me? See me?
We can see you, but you're
frozen on my screen.
Oh no, are we?
Marcy.
There we go. Are we back? Sort of. Experiencing
I'm losing you.
Difficulties. Okay. Oh, you're back. Can you see me? Am I back? I can see you.
Marcy?
Can you see me? No.
Oh, there. Okay. Can you see me? Are you?
Yes.
So sorry.
No apologies.
I'm going to take a chance that you can hear me, and I'm going to answer this next question, which is, which aspect of your research proved most unexpected?
Mhm.
And how did it shape your interpretation of the expedition? So I hope that's okay. I hope you can hear me,
Yep.
and I'll just go ahead and answer this question. So I think what surprised me the most, and one of the reasons that I always go to the story had played out in my book, and I mean it's just completely selfish. I want to go to these incredible places, but also I think if you can, you really need to, because it's really difficult to understand what happened unless you go. And so in this case, on this really remote river in the Amazon rainforest, I was shocked how quiet it was and how difficult it was to see the wildlife, see the life that lived there, because I mean, you yourself, you're being eaten alive by every conceivable insect, but anything that you can eat. I mean, I finally understood why these men, I mean, you're in the richest ecosystem in the world, and you have this, this legendary hunter, Theodore Roosevelt, and this man who understands the Amazon better than anyone who doesn't live there full time. And why are they starving to death? And the answer is evolution, because everything in the Amazon has evolved to either be a predator or to not, it hopes, be prey. And that requires silence, and that requires disappearing. And so I saw a few monkeys that were like high up in the canopy. I saw a few caimans, or the sort of crocodiles, kind of disappearing down into the river. I mean, keep an eye out for those guys. But besides that, there really wasn't very much. And it really helped me to understand how it was that these men were starving, again, in the richest ecosystem on Earth.
And that was also an interesting fact. I clearly think everything.
Sorry, I can't see you or hear it.
Oh no. Are we still unavailable? Oh. Okay.
I'm just not getting anything.
Interesting.
I don't see any other. Are you back?
And you're not seeing me? No. Wonderful.
Sorry, I hope it's not. It's probably my Wi-Fi. If you can send me any, since I can't hear or see you, but if you could send me any of the questions, I can answer them. Okay, I see one. How long did it take to write River of Doubt? It's amazing and so well done. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. It took me 5 years. So for some reason, I thought that it was my first book, and I was actually pregnant, and I thought, I can do all this, no problem. I can do this in a year and a half. It was just insane. And there was just no way. And God bless my editor. I've had the same agent, editor, and publicist for all of my books for 20 years now. And he was just incredible. And he gave me all kinds of extra time. And so, so for me, all of my books have taken between 5 and 6 years. And I would say 80% of that time is doing research. So it's going to where the story played out. It's going to archives, libraries, museums, all of that, which I love. It's so much fun. And then I spend about a year just organizing it all, annotating, just trying to figure it out, trying to understand the story. And then I And I outline. I spend a lot of time working on a really full outline. And so it's not till really the last year that I actually start writing. And I'll tell you another little personal story with this book. So I was actually, at the beginning, I was expecting my first child. And then by the end, I was expecting my second child. And the final proofs were due, and I was going to have my baby after that. And so I'm here in Kansas City. My editor's in New York. I was like, he doesn't even have to know. It'll be fine. Well, unfortunately, about 3 weeks before I was due, right when my final proofs were due, I get a call from my OBGYN, and she said that they saw something in my latest sonogram, and they needed me to come in. And it turned out the baby, my daughter, had a malignant tumor. She had a tumor the size of an egg in her adrenal gland, and I had to have her that day. So I had to drive home, pack a bag, and on my way, I had to call my editor and say, hey, guess what? I'm having a baby today, and she has some complications, and can you buy me some more time? And he was so great about it. And we had to move my publication date back, and all this stuff had to happen. And, and then I'm in the Children's Mercy, our children's hospital here, with her for months and months. She survived, by the way. She's 20 years old now, picture of health. We're super, super lucky. But she ended up having 8 rounds of chemo in those early days. I'm there with my proofs, trying to, mark them up and send them off. So, but what was interesting about that experience, as stressful and scary as it was, it connected me to this story in a way that I had never had. I understood finally this connection, that it's really about a father and a son. It is adventure, and it is exciting, and it is dramatic, but really it boils down to the love and caring between a father and his son. For Roosevelt, it was about getting his son out alive. Okay, if you could go back in time and witness any part of this journey as a fly on the wall, what moment would you most want to witness? Yeah, it would have to be. Well, I would pick 2, just because obviously one is when Theodore Roosevelt is really sick. He's in his tent. He calls George Cherry and his son in, and he tells them, you go on, I'll stay here. And the courage that took, and the ability to think about others instead of yourself, I think is so telling about who Roosevelt was and about his character. He wasn't scared. It wasn't about him. It was about these other men. And he was determined that he was not going to risk their lives so that they could haul him out. And it wasn't until he realized this connection with the son and the best. I would love to just be a fly on the wall of that tent and to hear what he said to them and their reactions, and especially Kermit's reaction. I also, and it's kind of ghoulish, I admit, but I can't believe. So at one point, so there's a murder on this expedition. This man, Julio, murders one of the other camaradas, and then he runs, he escapes into the jungle. And Rondon wants to go after him and find him and bring him back. And Roosevelt says, are you crazy? I mean, we're starving, and we are down to just a couple of canoes, and we've got all these rapids, and we're at death's door, and so we're going to go find a murderer and put him in our canoe. And this man stealing food all along the way, and so we're going to trust him to not continue to steal our food, but also to not kill us, because he knows that we're going to take him and he's going to go on trial for murder, But Rondon says, this is my country and this is the way we do it. So he goes, and so Roosevelt has to respect that. Rondon sends men to try to find them. They can't find this guy. But what is even more interesting is, so they continue to go down this river, and a couple of days later, they hear shouting, and they look over, and it's of this river begging them to take him with them, because he knows that if they leave him, it's to certain death, and it's going to be a horrible death. And they look at him and they just keep going, and they leave him. I had you back for a second, but I think I've lost you again.
Man, this is the river of doubt of virtual programs.
Yeah.
No, okay.
Sorry, everybody. I don't know. Oh, yes, you're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, everybody. And I'm sorry that it ended terribly, but anyway, I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, Marcy. And thank you, Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library. I love you, and I cannot wait to visit. Wish you all the best. Bye.